spent a long time now being an educator. And as an educator, one of the things that we always hope for, but can never be too sure of, is that students are actually learning something. Most teachers, at least early in their careers, want to see themselves as a cross between Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting and Dead Poet Society. Or perhaps for those of you of an earlier generation, Sir Sidney Poitier in To Sir with Love.
Next, we are going to be reasonable with each other. We are just going to talk, you and I. You are going to listen without interruption, and when I am finished, one of you may have your say without interruptions.
And it turns out that one of the most challenging questions to answer in education is whether or not students are in fact learning, if they have learned anything. To those not in education, this might seem like a strange question to ask, since much of what education is built around is doing some kind of assessment. If a student passed an assignment, they passed a test, or any other evaluation criteria that we can think of, we would think they must have learned something. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to pass. Ideally, this would be true, but unfortunately, it's not always true. We also know that assignments and testing aren't always the best indicators of learning. What if the person's bad at taking tests? What if the person just memorized for the test and forgot everything afterwards? Not that I've ever done that. A student might be able to synthesize information for a paper, but never really internalize the material, or even with ChatGPT now, not write the paper at all. Also, we have to keep in mind, we have to remember that some lessons do take time to learn. Where a person is at the time of the lesson may not be where they are when the lessons actually take hold. What is a time frame for measuring successful learning? Are we using the right metrics when we're trying to measure it? If a student doesn't learn, is it even the fault of the student? So many questions that we as educators often ask when we are exploring learning and assurance of learning outcomes. When trying to evaluate the outcome of our decision-making and critical thinking process, we first need to figure out what are the metrics that matter. By what criteria are we going to evaluate success? There's a book titled Measure What Matters by John Doerr, where he recommends a more inclusive and transparent approach in the process of generating metrics of success. He refers to this process as OKRs, or objectives and key results. And in this process, everybody is invited to create metrics of their own and to share those metrics, to have transparency in those metrics. And those metrics can both be short-term and long-term. And this provides people with a more fuller understanding of how everybody in the organization, in the enterprise, are being evaluated. This is not to say that there are not critiques or critics of using OKRs as an approach, because there are many critics of this approach. The point here is not to encourage you to adopt Doerr's approach or to use OKRs. It really is not to draw attention to key performance indicators or KPIs or some other approach or abbreviation. Rather, is to raise the importance to develop measurement outcomes in order to evaluate success that are inclusive, that people have a sense of ownership over, and are representative of the thing we're trying to accomplish in the first place. Furthermore, we need to think in terms of a multi-methodological approach in which we can use diverse sources of data, and we can think in terms of a nuanced understanding of success. We also want to make sure that the people who are being measured, who are involved in the measurement process, have the opportunity to define what success means for them. In looking at evaluation and measurement, one of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves is, will the things being measured actually in fact matter, or do they only matter because we're measuring them? In other words, we can flip this idea of measure what matters around to ask the question or think of the phrase, if we measure it, it automatically matters, whether it should matter or not. In short, we have to be careful, because having something matter just because it's measured creates a kind of measurement trap in which things only matter because we are accountable for and to them, and not because they actually matter, but not really count the right things that matter to our goal. This is also a good point to not only think in terms of whether we accomplished our goal, but also what is the cost of success. We can then evaluate whether or not we could have accomplished the same goal, but in a different way that would have been less costly in terms of time and resources and whatever measure of costliness that you might have. To think about this, we can go back in history to the Battle of Asculum in 279 BC, and I'm sure you knew that's exactly where I was going to go. At that battle, King Pyrrhus of Epirus, you remember him, defeated the Roman army, which you have to admit is a pretty big win for anyone. I'm sure King Pyrrhus must have been pretty pleased with the outcome, and he must have felt like mission was accomplished. However, the win came at a very tremendous cost. So much in terms of resources and troops were spent on the victory that left King Pyrrhus weakened overall. As a result, he had to end his campaign and return back to Sicily. Not that there's anything wrong with returning back to Sicily. I hear it's very nice, but it's not where King Pyrrhus ultimately wanted to end up. These events gave rise to the term Pyrrhic victory, which is a win that comes at such a cost that it destroys the victors as well. Both sides are destroyed in the process. When evaluating outcomes, we also want to explore what are the unanticipated outcomes of our decisions, whether those anticipated outcomes be positive or negative. Anticipated outcomes are simply those things that happen that were not intended or expected. When dealing with and thinking about larger systems thinking, we can explore how one event can reverberate across the entire system. For instance, we can look at environmental cascades that can occur when one thing happens that results in many other things happening as well. A primary example of this when speaking about environmental cascades is the reintroduction of the gray wolf to Yellowstone National Park in the United States. The reintroduction of the wolf, which was nearly extinct, resulted in numerous environmental outcomes that range from insects and plants reemerging to large and small mammals reappearing. Looking for these cascade effects helps us increase our evaluation and learning from the outcomes. It's hard to anticipate all of these dramatic changes would occur in Yellowstone. Nevertheless, keeping track of them shows how this one act of reintroducing the wolf resulted in much larger positive benefits to the entire ecosystem. We also need to keep track that unanticipated outcomes can be fountains of innovation and discovery. Some of the greatest inventions, for instance, were in fact discovered by accident. Take the Post-it note, for instance. It was discovered when a scientist at the company 3M was trying to create a very strong adhesive. He clearly made an error because what ended up happening was he had an adhesive which could be easily peeled off and removed. So didn't stick very well at all. In fact, was quite the opposite of a powerful adhesive. This unanticipated outcome led to the massive Post-it note industry that we have today. So this failure to reach his goal of a strong adhesive resulted in design thinkers all around the world being able to put their ideas on a wall and move them around. To improve our critical thinking, not just individually, but as a group, we always need to reflect on the entire process that we've gone through and its execution. There are always things we can learn that can be used to improve this process. And we need to instill the process of reflection and evaluation as part of our regular critical thinking process. For example, hospitals can use something called a Morbidity and Mortality Conference, or an MMC, to review situations in which there was an adverse medical outcome. The MMC is a non-punitive environment where the primary goal is to improve outcomes through an honest assessment happened and how those errors can be avoided in the future. The U.S. Navy SEALs employ a similar strategy no matter the outcome of whatever event they recently participated in. The after-action review, originally developed, in fact, by the U.S. Army, is used for analyzing what happened, why it happened, and how everything could be done better so bad things don't happen again, and things that went well can be learned from and happen again. There's an examination that compares what the goal was and what the actual outcome was, along with the steps along the way that yielded the result. It's really important to remember that in the after-action review, people can be very honest, regardless of their position or rank. The goal here isn't to lay blame, but learning and improvement. In other words, critical thinking about the action can be considered in a group environment honestly and in a way that allows for group learning. These are just two approaches, and there's many, many more. So whatever approach you use to evaluate the outcomes of your critical thinking process and decision-making and action efforts, make sure you are able to do so in an honest and open way so that your critical thinking continuously improves. And critical thinking isn't an end goal, it's an evolutionary goal. It's something that we're constantly improving upon, no matter how long we've been at it. So what can you do to help your evaluation process? First, invite different voices to help define what success means. Use something called a participatory measurement approach, in which diverse perspectives can help us expand the range of what might be considered successful. Second, evaluate what the cost of success might have been and whether the same goal could have been achieved using different means that were less costly. Or if it was more costly, was the cost worth it now that you know how much it did cost? Remember King Pyrrhus and his victory over the Romans as a cautionary tale. Don't let your group or your team or your organization suffer from a Pyrrhic defeat. Third, think in terms of cascade effects on the broader system or ecosystem when looking for intended and unintended consequences. We might think back to a causal model that was created of the variables at play when we first conceptualized what it is we want to do, and whether there are any additional variables that weren't considered and should have been. And now we can put them back into the causal model as our understanding of the system and the model expands. Finally, provide the opportunity for frank and open discussions for those involved in the process to be part of this review. Think about what took place, what could have been done better, and what could have been done to improve the process overall. What did we learn, and what should we be doing as a regular part of our process? This will put you in a better position to start your critical thinking process all over again for your next project or endeavor, but in a better position to start. So we're not going around in a circle, rather think of it as a cylinder spiraling upward. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the higher level you start out at the next time. As always, make sure you provide your own thoughts about how to do any of these elements, how to evaluate success in the discussion, in the comments. Thank you very much and look forward to hearing from you.